It was a quiet evening when Sophia Carter, a 22-year-old law student, stopped at a small convenience store near her college. She had just finished studying at the library and wanted to grab a bottle of water before heading home. Dressed in jeans and a simple hoodie, she looked like any other student. As she walked inside, she noticed a police car parked outside. She didn't think much of it. Officers often stopped at stores during their patrols. Sophia picked up a bottle of water, paid for it, and walked toward the exit. Just as she stepped outside, a voice stopped her. "Hey, you, stop right there." She turned around and saw a police officer staring at her with narrowed eyes. His badge read Officer Grant. He was tall, muscular, and had a firm grip on his belt. Sophia blinked in confusion. "Me? Yeah, you. Step over here." His tone was sharp. Sophia hesitated but did as he said. She had done nothing wrong, but she knew it was best to stay calm. "What's the problem, officer?" she asked politely. Officer Grant crossed his arms. "We got a report of a shoplifter in this area. You match the description." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "That's a mistake. I just bought this water. You can check with the cashier." "I don't need to check anything." Grant's voice was firm. "Show me your ID." Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out her wallet. "Here, my name is Sophia Carter. I'm a law student. My father is." Before she could finish, Grant grabbed her arm. "I don't care who your father is. Turn around." Sophia gasped as the officer twisted her arm behind her back and pulled out his handcuffs. "Wait, what are you doing?" she protested. Grant snapped the cold metal cuffs onto her wrists. "You're being detained for questioning." By now, people had gathered outside the store. A few had their phones out, recording. Someone whispered, "She didn't do anything." Sophia looked around, her heart pounding. "You're making a mistake. Please check the store's security cameras." But Grant ignored her. "You can explain yourself at the station." A woman in the crowd stepped forward. "Officer, I saw her pay for that water. She didn't steal anything." Grant shot her a hard look. "Step back, Mom." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She knew her rights, but she also knew arguing would only make things worse. As the officer pushed her into the police car, she thought of one thing: her father. He was an FBI agent, and he would never let this go. She glanced at the people recording and hoped someone would post the video. This was wrong, and soon everyone would know it. Sophia sat in the back of the police car, still stunned. Her wrists ached from the handcuffs, but the worst part was the feeling of being unfairly treated. She kept replaying the conversation in her head, trying to make sense of it all. Why was she being arrested? She had done nothing wrong. As the car drove away from the convenience store, she felt a wave of frustration wash over her. Her life was about to be turned upside down for no reason. She couldn't understand how this was happening. Sophia knew she needed help. She took a deep breath and asked the officer, "Can I make a phone call?" Grant looked at her but didn't answer. After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "One call. Make it quick." Sophia pulled her phone from her pocket, relieved it was still in one piece. She dialed her father's number, her fingers trembling. The call rang twice before it was picked up. "Hello," her father's voice came through the speaker. "Dad, it's me." "Sophia," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need you to listen. I've been arrested by Officer Grant." Her father's voice immediately changed, becoming serious. "What happened? Are you all right?" "I'm fine. I didn't do anything wrong. I was at the store, and he accused me of stealing. I tried to show him my ID, but he didn't care. Now I'm in the car on my way to the station. Dad, I need your help." Sophia's father, Agent Marcus Carter, was an FBI agent with years of experience. He had dealt with dangerous situations and criminals, but nothing in his career had prepared him for this. His daughter, the person he had spent years protecting, was being treated unfairly by someone in law enforcement. Stay calm. I'm coming to get you, Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with concern. Sophia nodded, even though her father couldn't see her. I don't know what to do. This is crazy. I haven't done anything. I know. I'll handle it from here. Just stay quiet and don't say anything to them. I'll be there soon. Sophia hung up, feeling a bit of relief. Her father was on his way, and she trusted him to handle this. But she still couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It wasn't just about being arrested. It was about how quickly she had been judged because of how she looked. She thought about how many people like her had been in similar situations, facing discrimination or being wrongly accused. It made her feel angry, but also determined. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about standing up for what was right. The drive to the police station felt like an eternity. Sophia glanced out the window, trying to collect her thoughts. She couldn't wait to see her father, but she knew that things were about to get much more complicated. She had to stay strong. As the car pulled into the station, Sophia took a deep breath. She was ready for what came next. She wouldn't let this injustice define her. She had no idea what her father would do, but she was confident that he would make everything right. The moment the police car stopped at the station, Sophia felt a rush of mixed emotions. She was angry, confused, and scared all at once. But above all, she was relieved. Her father was coming. She trusted him. As Officer Grant stepped out of the car and opened her door, he didn't say a word. Sophia looked around, noticing the small crowd of officers standing outside the station. She felt eyes on her, but she didn't let it faze her. "Come on," Grant ordered, pulling her toward the station door. Sophia kept her head high, even though she could feel the cuffs biting into her wrists. She was strong, and she would get through this. She had to. Inside the station, Sophia was led to a holding cell. It was cold, and the walls felt like they were closing in on her. But before she could settle, she heard the sound of a familiar voice from down the hall. "Sophia." She turned toward the sound, and there he was, her father, Marcus Carter, FBI agent, storming through the door with a serious expression on his face. "Dad," she cried, her voice cracking slightly with relief. Marcus quickly walked up to the officer at the front desk. "Where is my daughter?" His tone was calm but firm. The officer behind the desk, clearly nervous, pointed down the hall. "In there, sir." Without a second thought, Marcus marched down the hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing in the quiet station. As he approached the holding cell, he saw Sophia standing there, looking tired but strong. "Sophia, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine, Dad," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "But I don't understand. This is all a mistake." Marcus nodded, his jaw clenched. He knew the system. He had spent years in law enforcement, dealing with all kinds of criminals. But this was different. This was his daughter. Turning toward Officer Grant, Marcus said, "I want to see the security footage." Now, Grant hesitated for a moment, then crossed his arms defensively. "There's nothing to see," he muttered. "She was acting suspicious, and I had to arrest her." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Acting suspicious? She's done nothing wrong. You've got no reason to arrest her." Grant shifted uncomfortably under Marcus's gaze but didn't say anything. Marcus turned to the officer at the front desk. "Get me the footage. Now." The officer, seeing the seriousness in Marcus's eyes, quickly retrieved the footage from the security cameras at the store. Marcus watched it on the small screen in front of him. As he saw Sophia walking in and paying for her water, then leaving the store without any trouble, his anger grew. "I see no shoplifting here," Marcus said, his voice calm but cold. "You're not just wrong, Officer Grant. You're lying." Grant shifted uncomfortably, now realizing the mistake he'd made. The truth was clear, and the footage spoke for itself. Sophia felt a small wave of relief wash over her. She had known this was a mistake all along, but seeing her father stand up for her made her feel even stronger. But Grant didn't give up so easily. He tried to defend his actions, mumbling, She was acting strange, but no one was buying it anymore. "I want him to be held accountable for this," Marcus said, his voice firm. "This can't go unnoticed." Sophia knew that things were just starting to unfold. Her father's presence was powerful, and with him by her side, she felt confident that justice would be served. The tension in the police station was thick. Marcus stood tall, his eyes never leaving Officer Grant as he explained the situation to the chief. The footage clearly showed that Sophia hadn't stolen anything, and yet Grant was still trying to justify his actions. As Marcus spoke with the police chief, Sophia felt a bit of relief, knowing her father was handling things. The chief was an older man, well respected in the department. He knew the law, and he knew Marcus. He also knew that things weren't looking good for Officer Grant. "I'm not saying this didn't happen, but I need to handle this internally," the police chief said, his voice a bit shaky. Marcus wasn't about to let this go. "You need to do more than that. This is about more than a simple mistake. This is about accountability." Sophia watched her father as he spoke. She had always admired his calm and collected nature, even in situations like this. He had been through far worse, but this was personal. He was protecting his daughter, and he wasn't going to back down. As the discussion continued, Sophia couldn't help but feel frustrated. How could this happen? She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, in a holding cell, while the cop tried to cover up his mistake. The chief stepped aside and made a call. Marcus watched him closely, but he didn't flinch. He knew exactly what was going on. The department was trying to cover up the incident, to avoid any bad press. "We'll let her go, but no one else needs to know about this," the chief said, trying to smooth things over. Sophia's eyes widened in shock. "You want me to just forget about this?" she asked, her voice rising. "I've been arrested for something I didn't do. You can't just pretend it didn't happen." The chief sighed. "It's not that simple, Miss Carter. This is a delicate situation. We don't want this blowing up." Sophia felt a surge of anger. She had every right to be angry, and she wasn't going to let them make this go away. "It's not your choice to make," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I want this on record. I want the world to know what happened to me." The chief looked at her, surprised by her resolve. For the first time, he seemed to realize that this wasn't just about a mistake. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the system tried to cover it up. Marcus stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "You need to stop trying to sweep this under the rug. My daughter deserves justice, and I will make sure she gets it." The chief hesitated, realizing the weight of the situation. If Marcus was going to fight for this, it would bring unwanted attention to the department. But he knew he couldn't ignore the truth anymore. "Fine," the chief said, reluctantly. "We'll deal with it properly. But know that this won't be easy for anyone." Sophia nodded, feeling a small sense of victory. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but with her father's support and the truth on her side. She was determined to see this through. The news of Sophia's wrongful arrest spread quickly. It didn't take long for people to start talking. Social media exploded, with videos from bystanders showing Officer Grant's unjust treatment of Sophia. The footage from the store was everywhere, and people began sharing their outrage online. #JusticeForSophia became a trending hashtag. Comments flooded in from all over, many expressing anger at the way the young woman had been treated. Others shared their own stories of being wrongfully accused or mistreated by law enforcement. It was clear, people were not going to stay silent about this. Sophia, still processing what had happened, couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. She had always been focused on her studies, never imagining that she would find herself at the center of such a storm. But now, it wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. Her father, Marcus, had always told her that standing up for what's right was never easy, but it was always worth it. He had been through tough situations before, but this one was personal. He couldn't let this injustice slide, and he knew that speaking out could make a difference. Sophia's phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages of support. Her friends, family, and even strangers sent her kind words, telling her they were behind her. Still, it didn't take away the pain she felt. It was hard not to feel ashamed and confused. Why had she been targeted? One evening, her father sat down with her in their living room. The television was on in the background, and a news anchor was talking about the growing controversy. "Sophia, you're not alone in this," Marcus said gently. "What happened to you is happening to so many others. But your voice can make a difference." Sophia nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know. I just didn't expect this." Her father gave her a reassuring smile. "You don't need to expect it. What matters is what we do next. This isn't just about your arrest. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." The following day, a news crew arrived at their doorstep. Sophia's story had caught the attention of reporters, and they wanted to hear it directly from her. She agreed, wanting to make sure her side of the story was told. The cameras turned on, and Sophia found herself in front of a microphone. The reporter asked her to explain what had happened. For a moment, she was silent. Then she took a deep breath and began speaking. "I never thought something like this could happen to me. I was just at the store, trying to buy water, when I was stopped and accused of stealing. No one should have to feel like that. No one should be treated like that, especially not by someone who is supposed to protect and serve." Her voice was calm but filled with conviction. "This isn't just about one officer. It's about the way people like me are often treated, just because of who we are." The reporter nodded, listening carefully. Sophia could feel the weight of the words as she spoke them. This was no longer just her fight. It was a fight for everyone who had ever been wronged. As the interview ended, Sophia felt a sense of pride. She had found her voice, and she was ready to stand up for what was right, no matter how difficult it might be. As the days passed, the pressure on the police department grew. The media attention around Sophia's arrest didn't die down. People were talking about it everywhere, on the news, on social media, and even in coffee shops. The hashtag Justice for Sophia was still trending, and people were calling for change. Sophia couldn't believe how quickly everything had escalated. What started as a simple, unfair arrest had become a nationwide conversation. While she tried to stay focused on her studies, the situation was constantly on her mind. She knew it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the system and how it needed to change. One morning, as she was reading the news, she saw a headline that caught her attention. It said, "Officer Grant's past comes to light. More complaints surface." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She quickly clicked on the article. It revealed that Officer Grant had been involved in several complaints before, all related to racial profiling and excessive force. Several people had accused him of unfairly targeting individuals based on their race. The article also mentioned that these complaints had been swept under the rug by the police department, and no serious action had ever been taken against him. Sophia stared at the screen in disbelief. She had no idea that Officer Grant had a history like this. It made her feel even more outraged, but also determined. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been mistreated like this. Her father, Marcus, had always warned her that the system wasn't perfect. But this was something else entirely. The fact that this officer had been allowed to continue his career without facing proper consequences made Sophia sick to her stomach. But now the truth was out, and the pressure on the police department was mounting. The media was demanding answers. People were beginning to ask how many others had suffered because of Officer Grant's actions. How many others had been wrongly accused, just like her. Marcus, ever the professional, was already in contact with the Internal Affairs Department. He knew that things were about to change, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. The department had a lot to lose. However, they couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. The public knew the truth, and they weren't going to let this slide. Sophia and her father met with a local civil rights group that had reached out to them after hearing about her story. The group offered their support, and together, they began planning their next steps. They decided to file a formal complaint against Officer Grant and they would push for a full investigation into his history of misconduct. The civil rights group had experience with cases like this, and they knew how to apply pressure. With their help, Sophia felt more empowered than ever. She wasn't going to let Officer Grant's actions go unpunished, and she wasn't going to let the police department cover it up anymore. By the time the next news report aired, the police department had officially opened a full investigation into Officer Grant's past. The public was watching closely, and now the officers who had covered up Grant's actions were also under scrutiny. Sophia knew this was just the beginning, but she felt a sense of relief. The truth was finally coming to light, and she was going to make sure it stayed that way. The pressure on Officer Grant and the police department continued to build. As the investigation into his actions deepened, more and more of his past came to light. The public wasn't backing down. News outlets were reporting his history of complaints, and people were demanding justice. For Sophia, it felt like the world had changed in the blink of an eye. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a normal law student focused on her future. Now she was at the center of a movement, leading the charge for accountability and transparency in law enforcement. One afternoon, her father, Marcus, called her into the living room. He had just gotten off the phone with the police chief. "Sophia, I've got good news," he said, his face serious but with a hint of relief. Sophia sat down next to him. "What's going on, Dad?" "The department is finally taking action. Officer Grant has been suspended, effective immediately." Sophia felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't the end, but it was a huge step. Grant's suspension was the result of all the pressure, public, legal, and personal, that had been mounting against him. It was a victory, but it wasn't the full justice she had hoped for. Her father continued, "They've agreed to investigate the other officers who helped cover for him. There will be a full review of their conduct, too." Sophia felt proud of the progress, but she knew there was still more work to do. The department had tried to sweep things under the rug for too long. Now they were being forced to confront the truth. The next few days were filled with media attention. Reporters were calling, asking for interviews, and Sophia's story was being shared everywhere. People were now aware that this wasn't just about one bad officer. It was about a broken system. "It's not just Grant," Sophia said during one of the interviews. "It's the entire system that needs to change. If officers like him are allowed to get away with this, how many other people are suffering in silence?" Her words resonated with the public. Many were beginning to ask the same questions. How many others had been mistreated? How many had their voices ignored, just like Sophia's had been? Meanwhile, Marcus was continuing to work with internal affairs, ensuring the investigation stayed on track. He knew the stakes were high. If the department didn't follow through, the public would demand even more action. There was too much attention now. Then, a bombshell hit. Another officer, one who had been present during Sophia's arrest, came forward. Officer Daniels, who had worked with Grant for years, spoke out, admitting he had witnessed Grant's racial profiling, but had stayed silent out of fear. His confession sent shockwaves through the department. It wasn't just Officer Grant anymore. It was a pattern of misconduct. The truth was becoming undeniable. Sophia felt a mixture of emotions: anger, relief, and determination. She was glad that Officer Daniels had come forward, but it also saddened her to know that this kind of behavior had been going on for so long. With each passing day, Sophia was becoming more and more confident in her role as a voice for change. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been treated unfairly, for everyone who had felt voiceless. As the investigation continued, Sophia knew that the fight wasn't over, but one thing was clear: justice was coming. After weeks of public pressure, media coverage, and the internal investigation, the consequences of Officer Grant's actions were finally taking shape. The police department had no choice but to confront the reality of the situation. The evidence was clear, and the public was demanding action. Sophia had done what she set out to do. She had stood up for herself, and in doing so, she had exposed a broken system that needed fixing. It hadn't been easy, but she was determined to make a difference. Now, as the investigation continued, it was clear that justice was on its way. Officer Grant was officially fired from the police force. The department had no choice but to let him go. His history of misconduct and the public outrage surrounding his arrest of Sophia left the department with no room to protect him anymore. For the first time in his career, Officer Grant was being held accountable for his actions. Sophia felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about his firing. It was about sending a message to the rest of the department and to the public. The message was clear. No one is above the law, and no one should be allowed to treat people unfairly without facing consequences. But the story didn't end with Grant's firing. The investigation also uncovered that several other officers had failed to report Grant's behavior over the years. These officers, who had chosen to remain silent or turn a blind eye to his actions, were now under investigation themselves. For Sophia, the idea of accountability was what mattered most. It wasn't just about one officer. It was about the entire system. And she knew that real change would come from holding everyone accountable. The department made an official statement, acknowledging that it had failed to address these issues earlier and promising to do better moving forward. They committed to more rigorous training for officers on racial profiling and community relations, hoping to rebuild the public's trust. Sophia, though relieved by the department's actions, knew that this was just the first step. She had already received support from local civil rights organizations, and together, they were planning to continue pushing for systemic change in law enforcement. They wanted to ensure that incidents like hers never happened again. The mayor of the city also issued a public apology, acknowledging the mistakes made by the police force and expressing regret over Sophia's wrongful arrest. It was a small step toward healing, but Sophia felt that it was a start. People were finally beginning to recognize the unfair treatment that so many had endured for far too long. Sophia's story had made a difference. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the thousands of voices who had been silenced, and it was about creating a future where everyone, no matter who they were, would be treated with respect and fairness. As the dust began to settle, Sophia's life slowly returned to some form of normalcy. She returned to her studies, but now she felt a new sense of purpose. She had become a voice for change, and she wasn't going to stop speaking out. For the first time in a long while, Sophia felt that her voice mattered. She had fought for what was right, and she had won. The weeks that followed Sophia's victory were a whirlwind. The news stories about Officer Grant's firing continued to dominate the headlines, but for Sophia, the real work was just beginning. The department had made some changes, but she knew that true reform would take time. Sophia spent her days working on her law degree, but now she had a new focus. She was no longer just a student. She was an advocate for justice, someone determined to make a lasting difference in the world. She had seen firsthand how the system could fail, but she had also seen how it could change when people stood up and demanded better. One day, she received a letter from the police department. It was an official apology, acknowledging their mistakes and expressing regret for her wrongful arrest. They promised to continue their efforts to improve training for their officers and work toward a better relationship with the community. For Sophia, the apology was important, but it didn't change the fact that the department had allowed this kind of behavior to continue for so long. Still, it was a step forward. The department had taken responsibility, and for the first time, it felt like the wheels of change were actually starting to turn. Sophia was invited to speak at a local community meeting, where she talked about her experience and the importance of holding law enforcement accountable. People in the room listened, some nodding in agreement, others moved by her courage. She had become a voice for those who had been overlooked, for those who had been wrongly accused, and for those who had suffered in silence. The community response was overwhelmingly positive. People who had heard her story reached out to her, sharing their own experiences and thanking her for speaking out. It was clear that Sophia wasn't just a victim of a mistake. She had become a catalyst for change. Sophia's father, Marcus, was proud of how far his daughter had come. He had always known that Sophia was strong and determined, But seeing her stand up for what was right in the face of such adversity filled him with pride. Together, they continued to push for reforms in law enforcement, working alongside civil rights organizations and other community leaders. In the months that followed, the department made real progress. They implemented new policies focused on transparency, accountability, and community engagement. While there was still work to be done, the department was beginning to understand that true change didn't come from hiding mistakes, but from facing them head-on. Sophia knew the fight wasn't over. There would always be more to do, more work to be done to ensure justice and fairness for everyone. But she was ready for it. She had seen what was possible when people came together to demand change, and she was determined to be part of that change. As she looked back on everything that had happened, Sophia realized that her life had taken a turn she had never expected. She had been a law student, a daughter, a friend. But now, she was an activist, a leader, someone whose voice mattered. And she was going to keep using that voice to fight for what was right. Sophia wasn't just a victim of an unfair system. She had become part of the solution. And for that, she would never stop fighting.